Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so tonight we're doing the first half of a biography of Sri Aurobindo. You're probably thinking, boy, that's a long time to spend on a biography. The guy had so many unusual experiences that I thought it was important that you know some of them to give you some real world context. One of the reasons I selected Aurobindo to talk about is that he is a wonderful bridge between the East and the West for reasons that you'll see tonight. Anyway, so I want to start with a question. Can anyone write an accurate biography of a yogi? Sri Aurobindo expressed strong reservations about the possibility of anyone writing an accurate biography of his life. As he wrote in 1935 to someone who gave it a try. Sorry, I have to share my screen. Let me just do that right now. Okay, so now let's go backwards in our list tonight. See who's here. Kim is here. Why don't we start with Kim, the number 1.
The attempt is bound to be a failure because neither you nor anyone else knows anything at all of my life. It has not been on the surface for men to see Sri Aurobindo on himself.
Okay. Now, you'll notice that there's an abbreviation here after some of the references, SABCL. That refers to, there are 2 different versions of the collected works of Aurobindo. SABCL stands for the 30-volume Sri Aurobindo Centenary Library that was published in 1972. Those quotations without this abbreviation are taken from the more complete 36-volume Complete Works of Aurobindo. CWSA is how they're recognized. These were published beginning in 1997. And it includes all the volumes of the Centenary Library, as well as 4,000 new pages. The contents of some of the earlier volumes have been significantly rearranged, most notably in the older 3-volume Letters on Yoga, which I use extensively, which now appears in 4 volumes. I've included only a few references to the 17 volumes in the collected works of the Mother, which are known as CWM. So you can start to see one of the reasons why I needed a break after we finished the Sri Aurobindo section, because there's so much material, but it's high quality. So on another occasion, when a disciple asked Sri Aurobindo's permission to help a Marathi biographer in his task, Sri Aurobindo wrote, "I do not want to be murdered by my own disciples in cold print." As you can see, he often expressed a rather dry sense of humor. Despite Aurobindo's own assessment of the hidden nature of his inner life, there is an abundance of fascinating personal details to consider. Yes, it can be difficult to write the life of a yogi because of his numerous spiritual experiences, most of which transcend the range of normal human consciousness, which makes them challenging to describe in language that others can comprehend. Eva, would you feel like reading tonight? Number 2.
Trust of all that matters in a spiritual man's life is not what he did or what he was outside the view of the men of his time. That is what his historicity or biography comes to, does it not? But what he was and did within. It is only that gives any value to his order life at all. It is the inner life that gives to the outer any power it may have, and in the inner life of the spiritual man, is something vast and full, and at least in the great figures, so crowded and teeming with significant things that no biographer or historian would ever hope to seize it at all or to tell it. Sri Aurobindo, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. Okay. As we'll soon see, the first 36 years of Aurobindo's outer life were tremendously versatile. He was a professor, a scholar, a poet, a political leader, a journalist, a philosopher, a dramatist, an Indologist, a student of Indian affairs, a psychologist, a literary critic, a translator, and an original interpreter of the Veda, the Upanishads, and the Gita. To keep our survey of Aurobindo's life manageable, we will focus our attention more on the poet, the philosopher, and the psychologist than on the other roles he played during his multifaceted life. The first half of his life was visible to a large extent to those around him. There are countless documents and photos marking the various stages of his outward life. It wasn't until 1905 that he began to practice yoga. By the time he moved to Pondicherry in southern India 5 years later, yoga had superseded all his other activities. And then for the next 40 years, his inner life was indeed to become something vast and full. But even here, there are still plenty of evidence of his private yogic endeavors to ponder. Okay, so let's start with his birth. Aurobindo was born in Calcutta on August 15th, 1872. He was the third son of a medical doctor, Krishnadhan Ghose, Ghose, and his wife, Swarnalata Devi. While he pursued an advanced medical degree at Aberdeen University in UK from 1869 to 71, his father became a confirmed believer in Western civilization. Now he's Bengali, by the way. Okay. When he returned to Calcutta, he cherished the wish that India could transform herself overnight, if possible, into another self-confident and puissant and purposeful Britain. Puissant means powerful. He was so fond of the English way of life that he has been described as a thoroughly anglicized Bengali. At Aurobindo's christening ceremony, a lady by the name of Miss Annette Ackroyd was present at the event. Apparently, this appealed to his father's penchant for things English to such an extent that he chose her last name as his son's middle name. Aurobindo Ackroyd Ghosh did not share his father's love for Britain and subsequently dropped the use of Ackroyd early in his life. Dr. Krishnadhan was eager to give his children an entirely European type of education and upbringing. He employed an English nurse, Miss Paget, to immerse them in an English-speaking environment. As a result, they had virtually no opportunity to speak their native Bengali as they grew up. So let's look at his education from 1872 to 1892. In 1877, when he was 5 years old, Aurobindo was sent along with his two older brothers, Manmohan and Beno Bhushan, to the Loreto Convent School in Darjeeling, which was run by Irish nuns. There, English was the sole medium of instruction and the only form of communication allowed outside the school. Thus, English became, for all intents and purposes, Aurobindo's mother tongue. He grew up as a sort of exile in his own country. When Aurobindo was 6, Mira Alfassa, who was later to become his spiritual collaborator, was born in Paris at 62 Boulevard Haussmann. I'm just going to insert a few details of her life. The chronology I sent you has much more detail that you can acquaint yourself with. It's what, 5 pages long or something. In 1879, Dr. Krishnathan and his wife took Aurobindo and his 2 older brothers to England to further their education. The boys were entrusted to an English family in Manchester. Reverend William Druitt, a congregational minister, and his wife. Okay, so let's see about number 3. Who we got here? How about Linda Russell?
Dr. Krishnathan left strict instructions that they, his sons, should not be allowed to make the acquaintance of any Indian or undergo any Indian influence. These instructions were carried out to the letter, and Aurobindo grew up in ignorance of India, her people, her religion, and her culture.
Sorry, I'm just playing with my little screen here, sorry. Okay, so as we can see in this letter, Aurobindo occasionally wrote letters in the 3rd person. He's talking about himself here as Aurobindo. While his brothers were sent to the Manchester Grammar School, Aurobindo, who was only 7, was educated privately by the Druitts. Since the Reverend was an accomplished Latin scholar, he grounded him so well in that language that the headmaster of St. Paul's School in London took up Aurobindo himself to ground him in Greek, and then pushed him rapidly into the higher classes of the school. Now, I want to show you, I think I have to stop sharing and then switch to the other program. I think I have to do that.
Mark, what name did he go by when he was growing up? It wasn't Sri Aurobindo, right?
No, it was Aurobindo. So Aurobindo is a transformation of that name.
So what would his schoolmates have called him, or what was his first name and then his
That's his first name was Aurobindo and his last name was Ghosh, G-H-O-S-E. So that's how he would have been referred.
Aurobindo Ghosh.
Aurobindo.
Aurobindo.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So it seems that Aurobindo had a natural gift for languages. He had already absorbed English from his environment and now quickly advanced in his Latin studies. When he started attending St. Paul's Secondary School in London in 1884, he was 12 at that point, he made rapid progress in Latin, Greek, and French. In his spare time, he also taught himself Italian, German, and Spanish in order to read Dante, Goethe, and Cervantes in the original. While he lived in London for the next 5 years, he devoured English and French literature, as well as the history of ancient, medieval, and modern European history. Okay, now, I wonder if I can, do I have to stop sharing every time I want to switch to a different? Let me try that. Okay, so let's see. How about Harold for number 4, please?
Could you unmute yourself, Harold?
I'm trying. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Number 4, as to English literature, he showed much interest in the Elizabethan theater and for the great romantic poetry, particularly that of Keats, Shelley, and Byron. He was also fascinated by Jean d'Arc, Mazzini, and other heroes from history who had fought for the liberation of their motherland. As later told by him, he felt the urge to work for the freedom of India already at that time. Beyond man.
So during his last years at St. Paul's, Aurobindo began writing poetry. Maybe Bonnie can read this one.
Number 4.
5.
Okay, I have to get rid of the bottom. Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Having first experimented on Greek and Latin verses, Aurobindo turned a passage from the Greek into English verse when he was 17. This piece, Hikuba, was liked by Lawrence Binyon, later a noted poet and dramatist and art scholar, who suggested that Siri Aurobindo should write more poetry. This was what he properly launched on his career as a poet.
So I should mention that it looks like it's SRI, but it's actually pronounced as SHRI, Shri.
Oh.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that to look at it. But it has to do with the transliteration of Sanskrit. That particular S has an SH sound to it. So Jack, do you know Lawrence Binyon at all? Have you heard that name before?
Maybe I heard it, but I was just looking up Hekuba to find out what the mythological reference was there.
Okay. Now, this is one of the things that he did was he imitated some of the great writers in his own poetry in the early stages.
Hecuba was the queen in Greek mythology, the wife of King Priam of Troy during the Trojan War.
That sounds familiar.
She had 19 children who included major characters of Homer's Iliad, such as the warriors Hector and Paris and the prophetess Cassandra. So that's what Hecuba is about.
Okay. I'm going to see if I can. No, I have to actually stop sharing in order to switch programs. That's weird. Let me try it again. Sorry, folks, this is going to be irritating tonight because I've got 8 pictures to show you. All right. Oh, I should. I would. Son of a gun. There we go. Here he is at 18. It's a kind of blurry image, unfortunately, but you can see his hair starting to get a little long. Okay. In his final year at St. Paul's, Aurobindo successfully competed for the senior classical scholarship of £80 per year offered by King's College of Cambridge University. So no mean feat. Okay, I have to do this again. Boy, Linda and I are going to have to find out if there's a faster way to do this. Anyway, for number 6, how about Jennifer?
He sat for the examination in December 1889 and came out first. Oscar Browning, then a renowned linguist and writer, confided later to Aurobindo that his papers for Greek and Latin had been the best submitted to him as an examiner in 13 years.
So I hope you're starting to get the idea. Not only is he talented in terms of English and many other languages, he's also got a brilliant mind that's starting to show itself already. You don't get into Oxford with that kind of a scholarship unless you've got something to show for it. So he also registered as a candidate for the Indian Civil Service, the ICS, relying mainly on his proficiency in the classics. He passed the examination in July 1890 in 11th place, scoring again record marks in Greek and Latin. By now, Aurobindo was an exceptional classical scholar and was becoming generally known as a master of the English language. Here's a little quote, kind of cute. Okay. How about Linda O'Neill for this one? Number 7.
It slipped down a bit, Mark.
Sorry, what's that? Sorry.
As he was dictating, I marveled
Oh,
at
sorry, number 7.
sorry. An Englishman in later years traveling in India asked, "Do you know where Ghosh is now, the classical scholar of Cambridge, who has come to India to waste his future?"
That was the perception among his fellow students in Cambridge. Why would he bother coming back to India if he could have an illustrious career in Britain? All his life, Sri Aurobindo would refer back to the knowledge he had acquired during his youth. Near the end of his life, when his eyes had become too weak to continue writing himself, he dictated a series of articles to one of his disciples, Nirodbaran. So this is going to be, okay, how about Sylvie? How are you feeling about reading number 8?
Okay. As he was dictating, I marveled at so much knowledge of ancient Greece and ancient India, stored up somewhere in his superconscious memory, and now pouring down at his command in a smooth flow. No notes were consulted, no books were needed, yet after a lapse of so many decades, everything was fresh, spontaneous, and recalled in vivid detail. Nirad Baran, 12 years with Sri Aurobindo.
Don't you just wish you could do something like that? I can hardly remember the subjects I studied back that far, let alone whole poems. The following note is from one of Aurobindo's fellow students at Cambridge. It sheds light on his academic studies as well as his attitude towards the country in which he was educated. Okay, let's see if oh, Hangame, how do you feel about reading number 9 here?
For sure. Number 9. His interests were in literature. Among Greek poets, for instance, he once waxed enthusiastic over Sappho, and he had a nice feeling of English style. Yet for England itself, he seemed to have small affection. It was not only the climate that he found trying. As an example, he became quite indignant when on one occasion I called England the modern Athens. This title, he declared, belonged to France. England much more resembled Corinth, a commercial state, and therefore unattractive to him.
I find it interesting that he had this fondness for France. And as we will see, Mir Alfassa, who was born in Paris, became a major influencer in his life and in the life of all the people who were surrounding him, starting about 20 years from now. So as it turns out, Aurobindo Ghosh completed his studies with flying colors, but did not become an ICS officer. On 3 separate occasions, he was called to prove that he was an able horseman, but failed to show each time, preferring to roam the streets of London instead. We now know that the call to serve India, his mother country, had grown more insistent by this time. He had also developed an aversion towards colonial officialdom. Those who knew him at the time considered his rejection of the ICS a scandalous waste of talent. So the Maharaja of Baroda proved to be the beneficiary of this wastage. He just happened to be in England or in London at the moment when Aurobindo ended his academic career. This gave him the opportunity to hire a young man with all the capabilities of an ICS trainee for a mere 200 rupees a month. So that's how, in the same year as Swami Vivekananda, the foremost disciple of Ramakrishna Paramhansa, traveled to the West in 1893 to introduce Hinduism to the West at the first World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago, Aurobindo sailed on the SS Carthage back to his motherland after a 13-year absence. His father had expected him to travel on the SS Romania and actually died of grief after being told that that ship had perished in a storm off the coast of Portugal. So they never saw each other again. As he left the shores of England, Aurobindo was an accomplished Cambridge classical scholar, a poet, and a budding Indian nationalist. The strictly rational Western intellectual training he had received had assigned no place of importance to any form of spiritual experience in its worldview. Prior to his return to his homeland, Aurobindo was, for all intents and purposes, a staunch agnostic, if not an all-out atheist. Okay.
Mark, do you
Yes.
find it strange that he loved English literature but didn't like England?
Well, I don't know.
They usually go together, don't they?
Well,
To
maybe,
a
maybe
point.
not.
No, Sylvie says no, so I don't know.
We could have a debate about that.
He said he felt that, England was quite materialistic, like Corinth, the commercial state, Anyway, just a thought.
Well, his experiences there outside of his schooling had not been that great. One of the problems was that his father wasn't able to keep up the funds that he sent to the three brothers for a long period of time. So they were virtually starving for many years. So he didn't have a decent coat. So I think the winters would have been very difficult for a person from India. So I just have a feeling that his experiences there were not something that you would look back fondly on. Anyway, so imagine his surprise when he stepped off the ship onto his native soil at Apollo Bunder, just outside Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, as you know, in February 1893. The sense of calm that suddenly descended upon his mind was remarkable and most unexpected. However, it was to prove to be merely the first in a long line of spiritual experiences. Interestingly, he did not interpret it as an otherworldly event, thus distinguishing him from the majority of religious views. Okay, where are we at here? I think I saw Zilda online. How about you? For number
Okay.
10.
Number 10,
Yes, please.
all human interests are, I suppose, this worldly, and most of them have entered into my mental field, and some, like politics, into my life. But at the same time, since I set foot on the Indian soil on the Apollo Bunder in Bombay, I began to have spiritual experiences, but these were not divorced from this world, but had an inner and infinite bearing on it, such as a feeling of the infinite pervading material space and the immanent inhabiting material objects and bodies. At the same time, I found myself entering supraphysical worlds and planes with influences and an effect from them upon the material plane. So I could make no sharp divorce or irreconcilable opposition between what I have called the two ends of existence and all that lies between them. For me, all is Brahman, and I find the divine everywhere.
This profound sense of calm was to pervade his consciousness for a period of several months. This was the first in a series of extra-rational events destined to compel him to reassess the intellectual, agnostic, or atheistic perception of reality which he had inherited thus far. Aurobindo was never to abandon his intellectual gifts in later life, but was forced through his own spiritual experiences to see them in relation to more powerful tools of discernment he discovered, which led him to a substantially expanded conception of the cosmos. I thought I'd just draw your attention to this chronology that I sent out a couple of days ago. If you scan down to the second page, three significant events happened right away here. There's this one where Mira Alfassa marries the artist, Henri Morissette. She had been rubbing shoulders with all the prominent artists of the time, including Picasso and many others. But anyway, fell in love with this particular fellow, Morissette. At the same time, Aurobindo was acting professor of English in the college in Baroda. And then in August 23rd, the mother had her first and only son. Okay. Now, let me see here. I need to stop sharing. Go here. There we go. Okay, so I don't know how familiar you guys are with geography of India. So here's Calcutta on the right-hand side. This is where he was born. I thought for the longest time that Baroda must be close to Calcutta, but it turns out it's on the other side of the country. You see where Gujarat is over here, near Ahmedabad? Just below the T here is where Baroda, no, I'm sorry. I think it's now called Vadodara. Yeah, that's the new name of it after independence. So this is where he ended up spending a great deal of time once he first arrived there. So I'm going to skip over the years from 1893 to 1906 in order to keep this retelling of his life to 2 classes. Let me summarize this period briefly. Aurobindo worked for the next 13 years in the princely state of Baroda in the service of the Maharaja, and then as a professor in Baroda College. In 1905, he assumed the post of vice principal of the college. Let's see, this is he and his students. This is he in the middle with the cane. During this period, he also joined a revolutionary society and took a leading role in secret preparations for an uprising against the British government in India. In 1906, shortly after the partition of Bengal, Sri Aurobindo quit his post in Baroda and went to Calcutta on the other side of the country, where he soon became one of the leaders of the nationalist movement. He was the first political leader in India to openly put forward the idea of complete independence for the country in his newspaper, Bande Maratham. Prosecuted twice for sedition and once for conspiracy, he was released each time for lack of evidence. And I should say that he wasn't necessarily a pacifist. Gandhi wanted him to be, but he refused to be. He felt that under the circumstances, violence was not necessarily off the table. And his younger brother was actually imprisoned for revolutionary activities, as we will see in a few minutes. Okay, so Linda, I think we're going to take our break here, and then